Well, Sandra, thank you so much for this time, for the interview. Thank you so much for the Annie's list that they brought her here to Houston. And I wanted to ask you, Sandra, what does it say about a society when women are denied their rights?
Well, it says that as a society we have some progress left to make, right? And I think, a lot of people have asked over the last year or two, why are we fighting the same battles? Why are we back talking about access to contraception? How can it be that we're having trouble getting the Violence Against Women Act passed? These types of questions. And the only way that I can make sense of it is to think that our mistake was thinking that these were battles that could be won and done and we didn't have to worry about them anymore. These are civil rights fights. Just like the fight for LGBT folks to have protection from employment discrimination, just like the fight for people of color to have their voting rights protected. These are fights that we can never consider to be won and crossed off our list because it's about who has power in society. And there will always be those trying to take it back when we ensure it for populations that don't have as much of it. So that's what I try to keep in mind, is that we have to keep fighting on these fights. And I also remember what Secretary Clinton says, which is that it really is a determiner of where a society is going to be, how much that society is going to thrive. You look at how they treat women in that society, how they treat LGBT folks, people of color. It says something about how successful they'll be economically and overall. So I want the most for this country, and therefore I fight for the populations that have the least.
Why do you think men insist on policing or women's reproductive rights? I mean, why? What is it about? Is it power?
Well, I think that folks on all sides of these debates have good intentions. I don't honestly think that there are legislators who are thinking, what kind of harm can I do today? It's just not having an understanding of what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes. And that's why we have to support efforts like Annie's List to elect more women, efforts to elect more LGBT folks, more people of color, more folks from immigrant backgrounds. Because having those experiences, having those perspectives represented, changes the conversation, changes the legislation, changes the policy outcomes.
Yeah. You were saying right there at the conference that female immigrants do not have access to healthcare.
That's right.
Why so? Why is that?
Well, I think that there is a lot of anti-immigrant bias in this country. What I'm really fighting for is to try to get the 5-year bar repealed. This is a 5-year waiting time period on having access to these types of health care benefits. And when we talk about immigration reform and the pathway to citizenship, during that time, women and men and families are going to be paying taxes, contributing to our economy, being full members of our society in all of those ways, but not able to access the health care that they need. Right. We know, having just had a debate about the Affordable Care Act, that undermines our health care system, that means that people will be sicker when they seek care, and that they'll be turning to emergency rooms, and that impacts the cost of health care for everyone. So it's to all of our benefit to do it, and it's just the fair and right thing to do. When people are paying taxes, when they're contributing to our society, they should have access to the health care that they need. And so I hope that we can either repeal the 5-year bar, or, if nothing else, we can think about ideas like having those 10 years on the pathway to citizenship, having that 5-year bar count as part of that time, so that it's not 15 years until women can get access to a breast cancer screening, a cervical cancer screening.
I'm assuming that 5 years ago or 10 years ago, you had no idea that what happened to you would happen. So I want to ask you first, why did you choose to go in front of the congressional committee to speak about women's rights? And did you ever think that what happened to your life, because I'm sure that we'll talk about your transformation. I mean, I'm assuming that this was totally unexpected.
Some days it feels unrecognizable.
Right. I mean, it's like your psychic came to you and said, calling you a slut will change your life in a couple of years.
I went before members of Congress because I was asked to testify and asked to talk about the impact that the Affordable Care Act's contraception policy could have on women's lives. And at the time, we were hearing so much about religious liberty, but we weren't hearing anything about women's health. And it's entirely appropriate that we talk about aspects of religious liberty and ensure that they are protected, but we have to talk about women's health as well. And so, it wasn't just me, but there were a number of people stepping forward trying to make sure that women's voices were heard in that debate. And it just happened that, my situation caught some media fire and spread. And as an advocate, I think that we spend all of our time trying to get the public to hear how important these concerns are. And it's when you get that opportunity, that microphone, I think you have a responsibility to grab it and just start yelling, because that's a chance to live up to your beliefs about how important these concerns are and to really have an impact that we try to have so much of the time.
So are you grateful to Rush Limbaugh for what he did? Do you think that transformed the whole, it gave you a forum, a platform?
I'll never say that was a positive thing. I am thankful that it didn't happen to someone who had a background that was filled with more trauma or with particular experiences that could have made it worse for them. So I'm happy that it was me and that I was able to handle it.
So did you increase that thick skin, or did you already have thick skin?
I guess I already had it, but I think that what was important about that situation was that it shone a light on what was happening in our legislatures across this country, and what continues to happen, especially here in Texas in the legislature with the attacks on women's health care access. And that gave us a chance for all of us who may not have been paying as much attention as we should have been to see what was being legislated and to get involved. But we have to remember that doesn't end with the 2012 election. I think we were so motivated, so out there during 2012, that's got to be sustained. The midterm elections are even more important, if anything, because it's just key that we have people turning out and continuing to pay attention to these concerns.
Right.
But in a way, that was really good, because the phenomena that happened after, you got exposed made us all think that a voice your age and needed to be heard, right?
Well, I think what we have to remember about what we saw this year is that when we all stand together, we can have an impact. That's part of what I was trying to convey in my remarks today, is that we have to remind each other of our power. We have to remind each other that we're only silenced when we allow someone to silence us. And if we all stand together and we all raise our voices, we do have an impact, and we can create consequences in elections. We can create consequences for legislators who don't stand for progressive policies, who don't stand for people of color, for LGBT folks, for immigrant families, for women.
But what else can we do to bring women together? Because in your generations, and sometimes younger women, do not get together. They take it for granted that rights.
I think that I hear a lot of concern about my generation on this point, and I think that what's going on is that different generations are just not seeing each other. The activism looks different for millennials. Millennials are very focused on how our movements for social justice intersect with different communities. That's why my work is all about social justice advocacy, and that means women and LGBT folks and people of color and all of these groups and labor groups. And it just looks a little bit different, but there are plenty of folks my age out there advocating and organizing, and it's really about getting the generation that came before us and ours to talk to each other, to communicate, to share leadership, to work together. I want to assure everyone that young people are stepping up and that we do care passionately about these issues.
Houston is a hub for human trafficking. I think we're number 2 in the nation. But it still seems to be a topic that, we kind of hear about it in the media, but as a regular person, what can we do to stop it?
Yeah. Well, so I represent victims of human trafficking in Los Angeles. That's part of my work. So that's one thing that some of us can do. If we're a lawyer, if we're a doctor, if we're a social worker, we can contribute those skills and those services. There's certainly a lot of pro bono activities. But each one of us can just use our eyes. We talk about, if you see something, say something, right? When we're talking about national security. But human trafficking and modern day slavery is happening all around us. And we have to look for the signs, know the signs. Know that if you see someone who, there's a worker in that house, but it doesn't seem like they leave the house very often, right? Or if you see a young girl on the street who looks like she's waiting for someone to pick her up like that, those are times when you got to call the tip line.
What is the tip line? Is
Well,
that a national tip line?
There is a national tip line, and there are also national hotlines in various states as well. And the thing that I try to impress upon people is that, yeah, it's complicated to understand what trafficking looks like, and that you feel uncertain about whether or not that's what's going on there, and you're sort of hesitant to report it because of that. But just call the hotline, and they'll walk you through. They'll investigate it. They'll figure out what's really going on. It's better to do something than to do nothing.
So is it easy to find a tip line?
It is. It
It's
is.
you Google human trafficking.
Yeah, there's various ones. You can look it up online. There's a national hotline run by Polaris Project as well.
Before this whole situation happened with you and becoming sort of a well-spoken women's rights, did you have an idea that this could possibly happen? Was this the work that you wanted to do from day one, whether you had become the person you are today because of what happened, or?
Well, I've always been a social justice advocate.
Okay.
It's why I went to law school. It's why I got a policy degree in college. It's the work that I've done for my entire career. But right now I certainly have a different set of tools than I had expected to have. And so my focus is just on using whatever opportunities I have to contribute to these fights that I care so much about. And I think throughout my career that'll probably look different at different times. I am doing representation directly right now. I also do legislative advocacy in Sacramento. I'm focused on a domestic worker bill of rights there, as well as a bill looking at anti-poverty measures. So I'm doing legislative advocacy, representation directly, and I try to speak to groups to inform them about the fights we're facing and really activate and get people involved. So it's all about using all of the tools at our disposal, and that's something each of us can do, is just, do what we can. Honestly, the research shows that individuals talking to a neighbor, a friend, someone at church that they know directly, that has the biggest impact. So that's what I hope people will do after hearing me speak, is they'll go and tell someone else about what they heard. Because that's what shifts elections. That's what changes legislative outcomes.
I'd like to ask you a question about what you learned from this whole experience as a person, as an advocate, now as a leader of the women's movement. Because you went through a lot. At first you're trying to do the right thing, and then you get viciously attacked, but then something great came out of it, sort of the blessing in disguise.
I think that it was a reminder to me of our power and of how many good people there are in this country who will step forward when they feel passionately about something, who will stand up and draw a line against hateful rhetoric, against policies that hurt themselves and their neighbors. Myself included, as advocates, it can get tiring. It can get hard when you face struggle after struggle, and a lot of them don't go our way. But this last year has been, I think, very inspiring for a lot of us, myself included, to see how we do come together and how it does make a difference when we do that.
Is that the kind of change that you wanted to see?
Yes.
That's
yes.
great. Well, Sandra, thank you so much for
Thank
your
you,
time.
ladies.
Thank
I
you to
appreciate
Annie's
it.
List and Patricia Gras. And
Yes, thank you for being with
My
us.
pleasure.